Hey there, Maverick. Welcome to episode 4. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dig into the big dreams, bold move, and the million lessons along the way. This is our check-in, just you and me crafting and claiming a life that is fully yours. So these last 2 episodes, I was really going back to the foundation of my story, telling you a little bit about how I started in this small town in Seward, Nebraska, started on a farm, moved into town, then into Lincoln, and really how those first handful of years shaped who I am today. So I just want to conclude on this episode to kind of fill you up into where I am now, going into those junior high years, those high school years, and beyond. In junior high, I felt like I found my groove as far as the charm. So like I mentioned, I was not an academic student. I was actually having trouble passing my classes. But I did learn one thing in junior high that I didn't have in elementary school. I learned that a little bit of charm goes a long way. Now, when I say charm, I mean my ability to connect with teachers. And with my mom being a teacher, I think I realized that teachers don't love teaching the way we think that they do. I remember on the last day of school when I was little and my friends would say, "Oh my gosh, our teacher is going to miss us so much." And I remember laughing and saying, teachers don't really miss us over this summer. And I remember those conversations with my mom and seeing her and her friends go celebrate with a drink after the last day of school and cheers that the year was over. So I think I realized from pretty early on that teaching is a job and it's a hard job. And while there obviously are pros, there's also a lot of cons. So in junior high, I found my stride and I realized that if I could make a teacher's day just a little bit better, if I could tell them a joke or if I could bring them a drink or their favorite candy, or if I could help distract a troubled student so that they could get work done, I could very easily get on their list of favorites. And so that's exactly what I did. And it actually got me very far. And I look back now and I think of the grades that I didn't earn but got just because I think teachers liked me and just would bump that grade up a little bit. Magically, my D's turned into C's or even B's. 1, because I knew how hard I was trying. And 2, I made myself very likable. Those are lessons that I still carry today. Obviously, we're never perfect in business and contracts and quotes, whatever that looks like. Sometimes there's something that's missed or not said quite right. But if you work hard, and I have found if I really am just a genuinely likable person who comes at things with a smile, with effort, with attitude, it just gets me a lot further. So that was my biggest lesson in junior high. I'd finally kind of reached my stride, made more friends than just my one friend, Carlos, and life was pretty good. My stepfamily at that time was starting to have their own families. They were all older and started to get married and have their own babies. And so I was the family babysitter. If anyone needed a babysitter, I was there. I was there overnight so they could still go out with their friends. I was there the drop of a hat. If anyone needed a babysitter, I was there. So in my family, I got known as kind of the dependable one or the one people could count on. And I really liked that role. The next pivotal shift, though, in my life was really when I was about 14 or 15 years old. And my stepsister had gone through a horrible breakup with her husband, and she had a 1-week-old baby at home. And this breakup was just too much. She just couldn't handle it, and she actually almost tried to take her own life. It was a very, very scary night in the emergency room. She did survive, but the doctor at the emergency room said, "We don't think that she should go home alone with this newborn baby." So my family all agreed, but didn't know quite what to do. And so because I was the dependable one and the family babysitter, everyone agreed that 15-year-old me should be the one to go live with her and help her with this newborn baby and kind of in some ways be on suicide watch to make sure that she was okay. Now, as I look back at that as an adult, it's absolutely crazy. I can't imagine sending my 15-year-old daughter in that situation. But I think at the time, my family just didn't know what else to do. So I packed a bag and I moved into her house thinking it would maybe be for, I don't know, a couple nights, a week or two. I'm not sure. But the shift happened in my life because I never moved back home. I moved in with her, and in some ways we co-parented this little newborn baby together. Obviously, I grew very close to this baby and would wake up in the middle of the night for feedings and early in the morning and help with daycare runs. And we really felt like we were doing it together. I've always been a natural problem solver. So I think in some ways I was hacking this system. I was solving this problem. All she needed was a partner, and I could be that partner for her. So that's what my life turned into in a lot of ways, was working. I was working at a couple different jobs to make money, to pay for bills, to help pay for rent, to help take care of this baby. And that was that next step that I feel like I grew up a lot faster than most. I lived with her when I was 15 and 16. And then she had met someone. She had met someone and he was going to be moving in. They were going to be getting married, is what she actually always wanted, this perfect family, which was wonderful. I was so happy for her. But with him moving in meant that I had to move out. So I just turned 17 and had nowhere to go. My bedroom at my parents' house had long turned into someone else's bedroom. There were 7 of us kids in that family, and so your bedroom didn't stay yours after you were gone. So I had nowhere to go. I remember talking to some friends, actually an ex-boyfriend who had then turned friends, and they were all freshmen in college. And they were going to get a duplex together, and they needed an extra roommate. And they said, it's up to you, but if you can move in, we can split the rent 4 ways. So that's exactly what happened. And as I was planning that summer to move in with these friends, my world just fell apart one more time. I remember being on the phone with a friend talking about these details of how this living situation was going to work, and just thinking about the fun that this was going to be to live with 3 friends. And that's how I was going to do my senior year. I felt old and cool and like one of them, like a college student, even though I was still in high school, when I got the call that my dad was in the hospital. Now, my dad, like I had mentioned, had had type 1 diabetes since he was a toddler. And type 1 diabetes, back then, it was way harder than it is today. It's always hard. But back then, there just wasn't the technology that there was today. My grandma would tell me stories of the only way they could test for their insulin was that my dad and his brother, who was also diabetic, from the time they were toddlers, would have to pee into a cup, and they'd have to dip a test strip into their urine. And literally the test strip would say if their blood sugar was low, medium, or high. And then she had to take a syringe and choose the amount of insulin she thought she should give based on that test strip, which is pretty crazy when we think about nowadays with the amazing scanners that are attached 24/7 and the apps and the insulin pumps and everything that's measured precisely. Back then, it was so much more of a guessing game, and it was just so hard on people's bodies. My dad, throughout his life, had all kinds of issues. He had a pancreas transplant, a kidney transplant. He had one leg partially amputated, a toe on the other leg amputated. He had gone blind in one eye, and the list just went on and on and on. And so he never did get remarried. And so I always felt like in some ways it was my job to take care of him, to sit at the hospital with him. There was a lot of nights where I would sleep at the hospital and go straight from the hospital to school the next day, maybe doing my homework in the waiting room. But I was still a daddy's girl, and it was him and I in a lot of ways. And while my grandparents helped out a lot, I think I bore a lot of that myself. So I get this call that my dad's in the hospital, And it didn't surprise me too much. He had been in the hospital a lot of times throughout my life, but this time was different. And within a matter of days, his kidneys function went all the way down to 0. And I watched the monitors as they literally ticked and ticked and ticked until he was gone. I was 17. It was a couple weeks before I started my senior year of high school. And my dad had died. And I would say that was the third most pivotal point of my life. I remember just walking out of the hospital that night. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and just thinking that no one's going to be able to relate to me. I remember when my parents got divorced and I felt like no one could relate to me. And then I remember when I moved in to help raise my niece, and I remember no one can relate to me. No other 15-year-old is doing this. And then when I walked out of the hospital room, I felt that again. I felt no other 17-year-old I know just said goodbye to their dad. And it was a lonely night. And I remember driving around. I had this LeBaron convertible that I loved, this beat up convertible. And I remember driving and leaving the hospital and not knowing where to go. And I ended up in this parking lot of this park. And it was probably this time, midnight on a Friday or Saturday night. And I remember this car full of guys pulled up next to me. And they asked what I was doing that night. And were going to invite me to a party. And I just remember being so angry at them. That how could you think of going to a party on a night like this? I never get invited to parties. I was never the popular girl. And of all nights, this was the night they chose. I still think about that carload. I don't know what I said to them, but I'm sure it wasn't very nice. And it just helps me remember that we have no idea what people are going through. They had no idea what I was going through that night. And how would they have known? And sometimes we're so quick to be short with people. And we just truly have no idea. It's amazing how much my dad shaped my life in those 17 years. And now it has been 21 years, something like that, since he's been gone. So I remember the year when he was gone, more years than I had known him here on earth. And what a shift that was. And what questions that brings up of how well did I really know him. But I think what I think of most these days is how I wish I would have known him as an adult. I've had the opportunity to know my grandparents as adults, some of them. I've had the opportunity to know my aunts and uncles as adults, like me as an adult, them as an adult, and just be able to have the conversations that you couldn't have as a kid. The level of respect, the level of just shared knowledge that I don't feel like you have as a kid. And I think that's what I wish I had the most with my dad. So that kicked me into high school. And I'll continue that story on the next podcast. But thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you enjoyed this conversation, or if you'd like to share a story that connected with your own life, please let's keep this conversation going. You can always find me on Instagram at the Juliet Wright. So I want to remind you to make sure to go out there and create, claim, and conquer the life you are here to live. It is so short and precious. And always remember, I've got your back.